Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's program as we continue to celebrate our highlight week for the year, Clare Francis Week. I've been speaking before with a couple of our colleagues of a number of programs that we've done, and great to see another couple of repeat folks here as well. We are truly privileged this afternoon to have Franciscan Friar, Father Casey Cole, be able to join us as our speaker, and to be able to share his perception of Franciscan community and what his life has been like from a personal experience and from his studies and continued lived experience in Franciscan community and spirituality. Father Casey Cole grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I think I pronounced that correctly. Is that they don't like when we say Lancaster? I think we're supposed to say Lancaster.
There you go.
Before moving to Cary, North Carolina. He attended Green Hope High School and in 2011 graduated from Furman University with a degree in religious studies and a minor in poverty studies. Shortly thereafter, he was received as a postulant in the Order of Friars Minor, which we commonly refer to as the Franciscans. He was received as a novice in 2012 and in 2013 made his first profession at the Franciscan Interprovincial Novitiate in Wisconsin. Father Casey studied at the Catholic University of America from 13 to 16 towards a Master of Divinity degree, which he earned in 2019 from CTU in Chicago. During his formation, he served at Immaculate Conception Catholic Church in Durham, a Franciscan parish, and professed his final vows as a friar in 2017. In March of 2018, he was ordained a deacon, and on June 22nd, 2019, he was ordained a priest of the Order of Friars Minor by Louis Zarama, the Bishop of Raleigh. I personally don't know how he made time for this, but throughout his studies and formation, Father Casey realized he had a passion for spreading the gospel through contemporary media. His popular YouTube channel, Breaking in the Habit, boasts over 22 million views in such homegrown series as Catholicism in Focus, A Friar Life, and Upon Friar Review. Father Casey is also the author of two books called What Happens After Saying Yes to God and Let Go, Stumbling Blocks to Christian Discipleship, both of which are available on Amazon. A little plug, am I right? That you could, that's if anybody wants to go purchase those, they're available for purchase there. Even just from a personal standpoint, I got to know and follow Father Casey a bit through his media and really appreciated much of the way that he interacts and shares his spirituality with us in a very down-to-earth way, and had the privilege of getting to know him, even call him a friend now, a bit better over the last year. So really, Casey, thank you so much for taking the time to visit another Franciscan apostolate, albeit remotely and virtually like this, but we're really privileged to be able to have you spend this afternoon some time with us.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for that very long introduction. With my 3 minutes remaining for the talk, I think I'm going to talk about servant leadership. Now, it's good to be here. Good to relive some of those memories. It's been a while. But as I was just saying, today we're going to talk about servant leadership in the way of St. Francis. And leadership is kind of an interesting topic for Francis because it's kind of an oxymoron if you think about Franciscan leadership. The Order of St. Francis was founded as the Order of Friars Minor, the Lesser Brothers. For the sisters, the Order of Poor Ladies. Francis was not about ruling. He wasn't taking positions of power. His focus was never on changing the church or asserting a mission, accomplishing a task. It wasn't about being a leader in anything. He started a movement of men and women who wanted to be from below, who wanted to be lesser, who wanted to be subject to all. He famously said at one point that he would obey a novice if given an order, that he just wanted to be subject to everything, including creation, just being a servant to everyone. And so nothing about him says leader. And so it sounds weird at first to say a Franciscan leader. But I think we want to say it doesn't mean we don't lead at all. It's just that we don't lead in the way of the world. We don't lead in a way that might seem more common to us. For Francis, there's no sense of hierarchy in the brothers. That's not the way we assert our dominance. That's not the way we lead, is through our structures or power. We lead from below, and you can lead in that way. I was in a friar house one time and I asked the provincial, I was staying with the provincial of a different province, the head of the whole province, about something, I forget what it was. And his response was, "Let me check with the guardian." And so this was the head of the whole province who was subject to his guardian in his house. And the way he described it was, I get to choose who the guardian is, and I can set the agenda for the whole province. But when I'm in this house, I get paid the stipend he decides. I get to go on vacation when he decides. I'm subject to him as my caretaker. And it's such a weird concept, I think, that you probably wouldn't find anywhere else in the world where it is not top down. It's kind of a web where we're all kind of caring for each other, each in our roles and positions, before we go back to being subject to all again. We know famously Francis forbid his friars from calling each other prior, that our leadership wouldn't be from above. It wouldn't be from a place of status. Instead, we must take positions called guardian, minister, custodian. These are positions of service. I think at the heart of all that is the Franciscan leadership is that. It's about service. It's being subject to all, not control or power or authority. It's about being the greatest one can be in the way that one cares for those who are entrusted to them. It's taking the step to doing the difficult work, the work that no one wants to do, of giving yourself for others. Now, unfortunately, we know that these are not always things that we do, right? We kind of want power and we kind of want control, and our egos get in the way from time to time. We have our personal needs, and sometimes we don't serve others, we serve ourselves. And so for this talk today, I want to focus our attention on one line, really, of Franciscan theology, one concept that I think can help get rid of some of those distractions, those stumbling blocks, we might say. And it's just the first line of the first chapter of the Rule of 1223. And chapter 1 is, the brothers are to live without anything of their own in chastity and in obedience. So the evangelical counsels, but it's not just poverty, it's without anything of their own. And I think that this is key because it's more than just possessions, of course. Francis wanted us to be humble. St. Clare followed in this, in maybe even a more strict way, having no property at all. But we know from the idea of sine proprio, how he uses this in other cases, it's more than just having things. It's about not appropriating anything of our own. It's about a way of life where we don't claim anything as mine. We kind of throw that language out. We can use things, we can share things, but we don't strive after to grasp. And I think that this is what we need to take if we want to be good servant leaders, is we need to make sure we don't appropriate anything. And so what I'd like to talk about today is just a few ways that we do sort of appropriate things for ourselves and how a good servant leader lets them go, how they live more freely and they can be the servant of all. There are a lot of little things I'd like to say, but they're going to be grouped into two categories. The first category is a bit of a jarring one, I think, for us millennials and the Gen Zers. Gen Zers. It's not about you. I think we need to let go of ourselves and our egos and our needs and our wants. Take ourselves out of the equation. If we want to be good servant leaders, we have to remember it's not about me. Because the fact of the matter is the world doesn't need me. I have skills, I have talents, the Lord has blessed me in many ways, and I want to use them, and that's great. But at the end of the day, the Lord doesn't need me to be a savior. And the world doesn't need me to save the world. It needs Jesus. And St. Francis understood this quite well. He was a founder of the largest, most successful movement in the church, and yet he never wanted people to follow him. I repeat the line over and over that as a Franciscan, I do not follow Francis. That is not why I'm a Franciscan. I follow the one he followed. And I think that that's what he ultimately wanted, was he wanted to be the herald of the great king. He wanted to be the one who pointed to the true king. And that's what I think servant leadership has to be with us, is we need to let go of ourselves, let go of our need to have so many things be centered around us. And one way we could look at this is we don't need to do everything. I think there's this temptation sometimes where we think, well, if I don't do it, it won't get done. Maybe that's true, but that's not good leadership. That is thinking about me and my needs and what my legacy will be. It's not thinking about the people we're actually leading. I remember learning this in club baseball. I played in college, and admittedly, we did really well. And admittedly and not so humbly, we did really well because of me. I played really well, and I was clearly the best one on the team. And I clearly knew that and didn't let anyone else do anything. I was the only senior, and I led the team in a lot of statistics, so I did contribute. And we won. We won a lot. We won our division, we won our region, we went to the College World Series. We lost there, but we had a great season. But what I had failed to do was include anyone else in the leadership process. I made every decision, and whenever we needed something, I did it. And whenever there was a situation where, it was a make or break, I was the one who stepped up. I never let anyone else try, and I never let anyone else learn how to lead. And I never let anyone else fail because, well, I don't have time. It's my senior year. I want to win. It's about me. And what ended up happening was I left. I was the only player that graduated, and they tanked. They were terrible. And it's easy for my ego to think, wow, I'm so good. Look how incredible I am. But the reality was I didn't set them up for success. The guy who was president after me didn't know how to do anything because I never showed him. I never included him in the process. They had to kind of start over from the beginning because I had made the team all about me. And that is not great leadership. It might give us short-term success, but it will not give us good servant leadership. And I think sometimes we are unwilling to let other people do things, unwilling to let other people lead. And Francis talks about this in the admonitions. In Admonition 6, he says, "Let the friars appropriate nothing for themselves, neither house nor place, nor anything. And as pilgrims and exiles in this world, let them go about begging alms confidently in poverty and humility as members of the household of God. Nor is it fitting for them to be ashamed, since the Lord himself is poor in this world." And he goes on, "Though the more they are upset about their office being taken away from them, the more they would be about the loss of the office of washing the feet, so much more do they store up treasures for the peril of their souls." So there's this idea sometimes that, well, I just need to do it because no one else is going to do it. And it might be true for a time, but Francis says that it's not about you. And those who are unwilling to do the dirty work, unwilling to let other people lead and have positions of authority, really just store up for themselves treasures of peril for their souls. That's difficult for us, I think, sometimes. It's difficult for us to have that canonic experience that Jesus has, that's described in the letter to the Philippians. What did he say? "Who, though he was in the form of God, did not deem equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness. And found in human appearance, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." And I wonder sometimes if we're willing to let go of our positions of power, willing to let go of the need for success, to let someone else lead who may not be successful. We cling to that sometimes. We want other people to do what we want them to do. And this is not exactly great leadership. So we gotta let go of ourselves in the sense of we need to do everything. We need to be in charge. I think we also need to let go of ourselves and our needs, our own personal egos, our rights, our dignity. How many times have we had someone do something that we didn't appreciate, and we think to ourselves, am I being taken advantage of? Now, in one sense, it is a fair question. I think that we have dignity, and there's some respect to that for sure. But as a leader, our first goal can't be to protect our own dignity, to protect my own time. How we might think, oh my gosh, he's wasting my time. Yeah, it might be the case. That person might be embarrassing us. They might be making a fool of us. All of these things might be true. But a leader is one who's willing to accept that, willing to accept that I don't need my dignity from you. I'm here to lay down my life, to serve you. And so you might be taking advantage of me, but at the end of the day, you still need served. And so I'll serve you. And I've experienced this many times in my life, more times than not when I don't act properly. I remember being in a formation house one time and walked into a bathroom. As anyone would probably know, living in a place where you share a bathroom, sometimes there are messes. And this one was the king of all messes. I was just aghast. There was toilet paper everywhere. The water was still kind of partially running. There was stuff in places that stuff shouldn't be. And so my response was, hell no, I'm not dealing with this. You deal with this. I'm not going to be taken advantage of. I don't deserve this treatment. And so I walked away, found another bathroom, and just left the mess for someone else to clean. Seemed right at the time. I don't deserve that treatment. Until I found out just shortly afterwards that the person who had left that mess was actually very, very ill, and they couldn't take care of themselves at that point. And they left the mess because they barely even got to the bathroom, let alone cleaning up after themselves. And they were in a situation where they really needed someone else to lower themselves and help them. And I said, nope, you deserve to be, I deserve to be treated better. I will not serve you. And I wasn't thinking that at the time, but that's what the thought process ultimately leads to. When we cling to our ego, we cling to our rights and our dignities of what I need, it's really difficult to be a servant. And while it was unintentional, the effect was the same. I said, no, I will not serve you because my needs matter more. We need to let go of them from time to time. I think we also need to let go of our need to be liked. This is a difficult one for leaders. As someone who is a priest, as a Franciscan, as someone who is in a position where I can often do good things for people, it's very easy to get used to that, where people come to me with a smile. They know I'm the good guy. They know that I'm going to do what's best for them. And that's really great. The problem is sometimes we can get too attached to that, too attached to the compliments we get. Oh, Father, your homily was so nice. It made me feel so good. Oh, you always have such a great joke. You have such a great attitude. You're always supportive. These are great things for sure. But what happens when people need something besides a joke or some comforting words? What happens when they need a correction? What happens when they need to hear some bad news? Nobody wants to hear no. And so if we get too attached to the idea of being liked, if the mission becomes too much about my own feelings, what we might end up doing is giving people candy. I think of it, going to this elementary school, all the kids would love it if I brought them candy every day. But I don't think that that would be the best thing for them. That's not what's going to edify them. And so sometimes I need to say, no candy today. We need vegetables. Oh, you're going to have a hissy fit? I'm sorry, no recess for you until you eat your vegetables. Sometimes the leader needs to say, I'm willing to be unliked. I'm willing to be yelled at or ridiculed or talked about because I'm doing not what's best for me, but for you. And those can be challenging things to let go of. We really do, I think, probably above all else for religious, like to be liked. But that's not what our life is about. We can only hope at the end of the day, when we have done everything we can for people, that they will like us. But that's not why we do it. That's not why any leader does it. They do it not for themselves, but for others. And so how do we get away from this first thing? How do we get ourselves out of this? Well, I think we do two things. The first is we have to remember that we need to listen before we lead. Very difficult task that sometimes we struggle to learn. When I was in college, or right before, I was in a high school that had a great youth program. Really, really fantastic. We had hundreds of kids and we did skits and songs and Bible studies and all these wonderful things. And so I went to college trying to bring that with me. And I looked on the website for CCM and saw that there wasn't a whole lot going on. So I emailed the CCM president and I said, hey, if you need help, here's all the things I can do to make CCM better. And in my mind, it wasn't a mean thing. It was a nice thing that I was offering. But you can imagine how that was interpreted as, I don't even know what this campus is like, but I already know better than you, so let me lead. And I have to admit, there's probably a little twinge of that was inside me, right? There was a little bit that was kind of saying, I know better than you. And so graciously, the CCM president let me lead some things. And fortuitously, they turned out terribly. I say fortuitously, not because I wanted them to turn out badly, but because they were really good life lessons. I remember the priest pulling me aside at one point after one of the events I planned just bombed. No one showed up and it was just terrible. And he said, you're going to be a leader someday in Catholic campus ministry, but that day is not today. It was a nice wake-up call. And he said, it might be time for you to realize that high school ministry is different than college ministry. And it might be time to get to know how they're different and what the people's needs are and how you can adapt yourselves to this situation rather than just forcing what you want it to be. And it was such a great lesson to realize that, there's so much of this world I don't know. And these are all different people. maybe I should get to know them first before I try to do what I want to do. And I did this. And I got to know that there was actually some things about what they were doing, which was great, even better than what I wanted to do. And so I could realize that, I don't have to be the one leading, because look, there's all these other people who can lead and do some wonderful things as well. And maybe I can support and follow and learn. And maybe we can create something that's more than just me, that won't just fall apart like my baseball team the year after I leave. And so sometimes we remember to listen before we lead. But I think it also means that we need to always include other people. Even when we do lead, even when we are chosen to be the president or the leader of something, when it is our decision, that doesn't mean that we only go with what we want. There are other voices out there that deserve to be heard, not because we need them or because I want them, but because their voices are just as valuable as mine. I remember planning a CCM retreat one time, and I had everything planned out. It was perfect. I mean, I can plan a retreat. It was organized. Everything was going to be great. And I presented it to the team, and they balked at it. They didn't like it. And so, okay. And so I, got out the highlighter, and we start, scribbling things and moving things around. I'm saying, that's not going to work that way. And I'm trying to push back and move it. And after an hour, we moved everything around exactly to the position that it was to start. And I knew this because I had already thought about all the contingencies, and I'd thought about what would conflict with this. And I just kind of had to say, I told you so. Why didn't you accept this? But it was a reminder to me that they weren't rejecting it because the plan itself. They were rejecting it because their opinion hadn't been heard, because they didn't feel a part of the process, because I was just shoving it down their throats. And there's something about other people's opinions that matter, not because they're necessarily great or bad or whatever they are, but simply because we're doing this together. I see it all the time in churches, unfortunately, where the priest will say something like, well, I'm going to empower the laity to do this thing because Father can't do everything. And you had me tell that last line. The laity should be doing things not because Father can't do everything. They should be doing things because it's their church too, because their opinion matters. And so who cares what Father thinks? It's about what we all think. And I think this is an example for church, but it's an example for any form of leadership, that we work collaboratively, not because the leader can't do it himself or herself. We do it collaboratively because that's the way things are done, because that's what servant leadership looks like, because we are better off together than we are alone. And so reminding ourselves that, yeah, we might be able to do it more efficiently, sure, but we can't do it more effectively on our own. There's something about going farther, about going deeper, that requires everyone. And so we need to let go of ourselves. And so that's a first point here. Sine proprio, do not appropriate positions of power. Do not appropriate the need to be liked. Do not appropriate any of the things that make me the center. Let them go. Let's work together, because it's not about me. The second thing, maybe more challenging, is that it doesn't have to be successful. At least not successful in the way that we want it to be successful. We need to say sine proprio to success, to winning, to getting lots of people, to everything turning out all right. Because ultimately, I'm not the leader. Ultimately, I'm not in the charge. I'm not going to have the grand vision. There's something more than what I can plan. I think it's such a heroic act that we can see, and in some ways a sad act, that St. Francis resigned from the order. St. Francis had a vision for the order, and anyone who studied Franciscan history knows that it did not turn out the way he wanted. Even within his lifetime, it had unraveled to every different direction. He famously came back from the Holy Land to find that the brothers had built a giant house for themselves. And so he climbed up and started tearing it down, saying, the brothers shall not appropriate houses. Even in his lifetime, it had not been his version of success. But he was willing to let that go, willing to realize that there was something here beyond him. And I think that this can be very challenging for us, but ultimately we must remember that we are weak. Ultimately, we must remember that we are not the ones who will save people, that it is not our vision that will do everything. I think a lot of us are kind of semi-Pelagians. I think we're subtle heretics, that we think that my will accomplish everything. If I work hard enough, we can be successful. But the reality is that we can't. We fall short. We are weak. It cannot be entirely up to us. But in that, we can find that God is even in the weakness, that God is in our stumblings and fallings, and how incredible it can be that there's a plan beyond the things I can control. On Good Friday a couple years ago, I was in formation still, and I was asked to give a reflection on Good Friday. Very, very solemn day, very serious. And I love to preach. I love to talk. And so I was excited. I was at the largest parish in Washington, D.C., asked to preach to 1,000 people, biggest opportunity I'd ever had. And so I wrote something down. I was really proud of what I wrote, but God had other plans. I wanted to tell them about Jesus' crucifixion, about his weakness, but God wanted me to show it. And so, as it would turn out, I got a migraine about 2 hours before the Good Friday service. I thought, hey, I can do this. I'm strong enough. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps. So I took some caffeine, took a nap, all good. I got up in front of the congregation. I looked down at my notes, and I couldn't see a thing. If anyone's ever had a migraine, you know it's more than just a headache. It's blurry vision. It's confusion. Sometimes I can't speak correctly. It is like an ice pick through your eyes. You feel nauseous. It's a complete sensory deprivation overload mix. Not a good situation. So I'm up there deciding, well, I guess I'll just do the thing from memory. So I start going and then forget where I was going. Just completely lose my place. And there are no notes to look at this point. So I do what any good speaker would do. I go back to the beginning and start over. I hope they won't notice. Yeah, it didn't get better after that. It was a complete disaster from start to finish. I didn't get through the whole thing. I rambled a bit. I'm sure that I said gibberish words because they weren't making sense in my brain. And then I went back to the sacristy, fell on the floor and cried because I had made a fool of myself. I had completely failed and ruined the Good Friday service. Except that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that later that night, one of the friars texted me and said, I want to let you know how proud of you I am. Proud of me? Not the word I would have used. He says, you did something really interesting up there, that you showed people it was okay to be weak. And it was okay to fail and to ask for help. I came in and read the rest of your homily, and it was very nice. You showed them what it looks like to have someone lift you up. And in a very odd way, it was sort of a depiction of the cross, because Jesus, by any human standards, was a failure. He was a man speaking gibberish, for all we can say. I mean, he was ridiculed, crucified, and died, betrayed by his followers. He was a man who tried to bring peace and justice and mercy, and people utterly rejected him. This is not an earthly success. But what was God able to do through that failure? Through that different vision of maybe what it was supposed to be like? He was able to bring us salvation. He was able to lift us up through Jesus. That even through his failure, even through this earthly lack of success, God was able to achieve something much greater than we can think. And I really found that to be touching afterwards, to realize that people were deeply moved by my gibberish and deeply moved by my falling to the ground and my weakness. How strange it is that God can take our worst moments and can transform them into new life. It's not about me being in control. It's not about me being successful by my standards of success. It's about letting God be strong, because we really are weak. I love the passage from Second Corinthians. St. Paul begs the Lord, I begged the Lord about this, that he might remove the thorn from his flesh. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. I will rather boast most gladly of my weaknesses, in order that the power of Christ may dwell within me. Therefore, I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Sometimes we need to let go of this need to be in control, this need to be powerful, this need to be successful by earthly standards, and realize that the only success that matters is what God is doing. And so play your part and get out of the way. So I think weakness is one thing. I think our expectations are too narrow sometimes. Sometimes we fail to see what God is actually doing. I wanted to learn Spanish one summer. And so I went to my director and said, hey, can I go to Mexico to learning school, whatever? and just study for a couple months. And he said, yeah, that's great. And I was really excited, but I made a fatal mistake. And that fatal mistake was I mentioned this in public. And unfortunately, one of the other friars heard me. And one of these other friars was one that I really didn't like at all. I know that might sound strange, but it is true that sometimes the friars don't get along. And the two of us just didn't. On paper, we made no sense together. I could tell that he didn't like me. We had very different attitudes. It was going to be a colossal disaster if we ever spent time together. And so he was the one who heard it. And of course, he jumped right up and said, "Ooh, can I come too?" Yeah, this was going to set up to be a terrible, terrible summer. And so we went away to a foreign country in a very poor part of the country, having to depend on people we've never met before. And I'm taking the worst possible person I could. I had very low expectations. As it turns out, it was a terrible summer, one of the worst of my life, but not because of this brother. It turns out that he was the best part, that I learned from him. And we shared stories and shared intimate things about our lives. And we never ended up becoming friends. I can't say that. We can't say that we necessarily liked each other. But I can say with all honesty that I grew to love him, to respect him, to go back to the United States with a different perspective on him, that now we would text each other and now we'd catch up with each other and make sure we were doing okay, because we had been through something very difficult and we could only see each other's humanity. All the other first world problems kind of faded away and we were just brothers caring for each other. How incredible it is that God exceeds our expectations, that he surprises us sometimes. How incredible it is that the world is beyond what we can see. Eye has not seen, right? And so we must give up our own expectations, our own narrow visions. Sine proprio. Don't appropriate them as the only way, because sometimes our vision is too small. I think related to weakness is we need to let go of our sins and our wounds. How difficult it is sometimes to do this. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie The Mission, but I just showed it to my students yesterday. There's a great scene where a man, he kills his brother and he feels incredible remorse. And he just sits in his cell, dejected for the rest of the scene, whatever. I guess he's just there for months. And he refuses to accept that he could be forgiven. And so he's given a penance. He will carry his artifacts of war, his armor, his sword, and he'll climb up the mountain to the people that he's abused. And the whole way there, he's dragging and dragging. All the other Jesuits say, just cut it off. Let him go. This penance is too much. And the lead Jesuit says, I agree, but he doesn't. And until he doesn't, then he shouldn't. And I think this is such a beautiful depiction. I'm not sure if I'm describing it all that well. You can actually see it. I have a picture of it right here on the wall of that scene. That's what we do with our wounds and our sins. We carry them with us. And God is that one that's saying, let it go. Let it go. I don't care anymore. But we're the ones who drag it with us, who continue to let it weigh us down. It gets in the way of who we are called to be. And I think it makes us terrible leaders if we lead with our sinfulness. We lead with our weakness. We lead with our self-pity. God says, I don't want that anymore. I've redeemed you. I've given you new life. Let it go. Accept that you're a sinner, yes. But remember the other half of the story, that you are forgiven. I think it's so difficult for so many of us because we're repeat sinners. We do the same thing over and over again. We say, how could God forgive me? I remember being in confession one time and feeling this. And I went to the priest for the third time in a couple weeks. I was so ashamed. And I just looked at him, probably couldn't even look at him. I just said, Father, it's the same three things. I'm just so ashamed. And there was this awkward silence where I just knew he was angry and he was disappointed in me. And I didn't know what he was going to say. And finally he spoke up. He said, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to remind me. I have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't know if you can feel my joy, exuding. Like that's one of the greatest moments of, what? You forgot? It's gone? And it was such an insight into who God is, that's what confession is. That is what receiving the Eucharist is it obliterates our sin, that we become united with Christ and there is no more of my weakness. It is Christ living in me. It's so important that we must remember what Pope Francis has said so many times, that God never tires of forgiving us. It is us who tires of asking. And so the good servant leader is the one who recognizes that I'm not the one who can save. I am not the one who will see it all the way through. You will not be successful because of my volition, because of my actions. I think it's the one who is like Pope Francis. When asked who he is back in 2013, he said, I'm a sinner. And not in a self-deprecating way, not in a hateful way or self-loathing way, not in a super meticulous way, but simply in a humble way, a recognition that I need God. I need him to be the leader. And so because of that, I'm not going to come in guns blazing. And I'm not going to come in arrogant. And I'm not going to come in telling everyone what to do, the things that I can't do. I think when we recognize our weakness, we recognize that our vision is limited. We recognize that we can't be the savior of others. We begin to do as Francis did and point outward, so that people may not be followers of us, but they'll follow the one we follow. This makes for a very, very different leader, I think. One who understands their place, who can serve not from above, but from below, who knows what it means to hurt and knows what it means to need someone else. And so we can go and be those things for those people, not as its saviors, but as people's servants, as their companions, not above, but from below and from beside, with and for. And I think that this is what Francis did. It's certainly how he treated the lepers. It's how he treated the brothers, listening to them, getting to know them, responding to their needs, remembering that it's not all about them. I'd like to close with a little reflection here. It's commonly known as the Romero Prayer, but it's titled "The Prophets of a Future Not Our Own." It's a prayer I pray all the time. As a reflection, probably every couple weeks, I remind myself of my role in this world. That if I want to be a true leader, it points me to the direction I need to go and reminds me who I am in this process. And it goes like this. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. I know that is a 20th century work of poetry, but I think that it could be just as well attributed to St. Francis. Not that he wrote it, but it describes who he was as a leader, as someone who wasn't looking at the giant vision, who wasn't trying to be the leader of all, who wasn't trying to point everything to himself, but simply did what was his to do, and then called the brothers to ask Jesus what it was theirs to do. Do something, and do it very well, and let that something be servant. Be a servant for all. Lead in the way that you love, in the way that you do your little things, and you bring great joy to the things that seem to not matter, knowing that you may never see the full end to it, but we give glory to God that he will, and that we are taking part in his work that is not about us. And so with that, I say, go be servant leaders. And I guess we have time for questions, maybe.
We do. Well, wow. Yeah, take a moment to get a rest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. I'm watching folks individually clap and then, of course, virtually clap. And just even as I realize in this environment, thanks again for your good humor and accepting our invitation all the way from Georgia. I don't know if I mentioned that Father Casey, his friary is in Georgia now, but at least we can look at the positive, and that this medium allows us to be able to come together and to have you be able to share that. Thank you so much for obviously such a very well prepared talk. I think it's probably understood. You saw me looking down. I was taking notes as opposed to not paying attention or doing other work just now. But by all means, if we can open it up, if anybody has a particular question, if you want to use, I have other things we could speak about as well in response. But does anybody have a particular response or question that they would like to either raise their hand maybe, or take themselves off mute and be able to pose to Father Casey in response? There we go. Brother Tom, thank you. I see that. Actually, Father Casey, there were 3 Franciscan brothers from. It's Brother Tom, Brother Greg, who was here, he put himself just, and Brother Bill, I mentioned, just to show that. So Brother Tom, thanks. Oh, you got to take yourself off mute.
So
Thanks.
thank you. I thought that your presentation was excitingly excellent.
Thank you.
I have a question about Claire. What do you think Francis learned about servant leadership from Claire?
Well, I have to admit I'm not as well versed in Claire. I would say I'm not sure what he learned from her, but what I've learned from her, what I find inspiring about her is she was determined and committed to her mission and kind of unrelenting in her privilege of poverty. I always look to it. She, I guess, learned from Francis that you don't speak ill of the priests or the Vatican or the Pope or anything like that, but there are ways to get your way, and there are humble ways of asserting what you think to be the truth. And I look to her example as being much more successful than Francis. Francis really didn't get what he wanted, but Claire certainly did, and she held firm to what she truly believed to be the mission of the Clares. But as far as other concrete things, I'm not the right person to ask, I guess.
When you began, when I finished at the Franciscan Institute, I got a very good background in Francis. But Regis Armstrong said, if you get stuck with Francis and Claire, you're not realizing that their fingers are pointing beyond themselves to Jesus. Now, Francis did it, but Claire said it. Since I have come to know our most holy Lord Jesus Christ through Francis. It was a wonderful, wonderful statement. You began talking about Jesus, which is the only important part of the whole thing. Thank you.
It's what I often find so infuriating about depictions of Francis, is that they make him out to be a lover of animals, lover of the poor, a good holy man. All these things are great, but Jesus was the center of everything he was. And unless he is in every single scene, then it's not the real Francis.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Brother Tom and Father Casey. Brother Bill, thanks.
I just have to get myself unmuted here. I was just going to thank you, Casey, for sharing your personal stories. I think that that kind of made everything a little clearer. And I would just encourage you to continue to do that when you speak to audiences. I think your personal stories were very helpful to the points you were making.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I've said this a number of times recently where, worst case scenario, I just have a great story out of something. We talk about, oh, wouldn't it have been embarrassing if this happened? And I was like, yeah, it would have been embarrassing, but would have made for a great homily. And you start to think of how experiences like that can even be used for the better.
Right. Now I've noticed that we take experiences from our own lives, and even though it's something bad happened, you could say, I see there's a homily in there somewhere.
Yeah.
To at least make a benefit. If I could pick up on what Brother Bill said, Father Casey, I'm going to prod you a bit because I know another fact that links to something you were speaking about. One of the points that I wrote then put a big star next to was the laity should be doing things because it's their church too. And without giving away the answer to that, maybe do you want to comment on your choice of ministers at your own priestly ordination, the lay ministers at your own? What I think you know what I'm speaking about.
Yeah, no. So I wanted to be faithful to the rubrics and the expectations of the church. So I didn't want to have my own agenda and say, I'll get away with things. But I also thought within the rubrics of the church, there's an opportunity to empower people that are often not empowered. And so I had all roles that were required of priests. I had priests, including Eucharistic ministers, while technically lay people can. The spirit of it is the priest should be doing it unless extraordinarily needed. But for all other roles, I had women do them, so lay women. So all the altar servers, all 6 of them were women. Both cantors and both lectors were women. The gift bearers were women. I'm trying to think of other things. But it bothered me going to many ordinations and just seeing nothing but men anywhere. And maybe there'd be a woman lector or a woman cantor. But I wanted to make sure that it was more representative of the church. And it was a wonderful image for me to be up being ordained and to be surrounded by men and women, the women right there on the altar with the men. And so it's a difficult one for sure, and something that I certainly have no right to really talk about as a man in the church in some ways, because I don't know the experience of others. But as someone in the church that does have an opportunity to lead, sometimes that means making sure that other people who are not allowed to lead do get to lead. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll say about that is just it was very helpful for me in my ordained ministries class that our professor talked about the ordination of women. And he said, the church is very clear on what women can't do. But what the church often lacks is upholding things that they can do. And he said, he kind of charged us. He said, make sure that that's something that you do, that you let your voice be known, that there are lots and lots of roles out there that are often overlooked or not utilized.
Great. That's the same thing I was thinking of. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that very much it fits with the Franciscan leadership concepts that we were speaking about today, about each of us have a place in the church, and in that church that we're all working on continually rebuilding in Francis' example. So thanks for that. Again, interrupt me, who has lots of ideas thrown out about what we should give up and not try to appropriate in Franciscan spirituality. Anybody have another comment or question? Hi, Ben.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Thank you too. I did miss the first 5 to 7 minutes, so hopefully
that was just me giving a long introduction about Casey, so you didn't miss anything.
Okay.
No,
well, it could have been in there. I was just, I guess, less of a theological question and more of a practical one, I suppose. Being that I guess we could argue that you are more youthful than the other Franciscan brothers on the call.
Your words, not mine.
I imagine that gives you a great opportunity to connect with our youth and in college age individuals. Can you talk about some of the I guess benefits and challenges that you've experienced in your journey just from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, let it be known that I've never been cool. So it doesn't matter what my age is. I've never really liked pop music, and I've never really been popular. I joke with some, you can look at my YouTube analytics, you can see what age range and gender and all that. And my weakest age range is 13 to 17-year-old girls. And I said, well, some things never change, right? That's just never been good with that. But yeah, I mean, I think just the age, one thing, not only age, but being told that I look very young for my age, I guess is somewhat relatable for some of the high school and college students. I don't know. I guess I speak a little bit of the language. I'm a little bit into the culture, so I can relate to them in just what's going on. But I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily just age, or I don't think it's necessarily any one thing. It still takes some of the things I talked about I listen to Spotify playlists of pop music so that I can get to know what they're listening and try to follow what they're following. And it really is trying to get to know who they are. I guess some of the things come natural, as I think I mentioned, just throwing a football. I can still do that pretty easily and pretty well. And so that's really impressive to people. And maybe I won't be able to do that as well in 10, 20 years. So I do try to accentuate some things that I can do well that maybe they can relate to. I don't know, little things like they have this lounge that they're allowed to go in, the seniors, and they have an Xbox with Madden. And so I went in and I beat one of the kids in Madden one day. And that was very impressive to them. Like, oh, you lost to a priest. It's like, guys, I've been playing Madden longer than you've been alive. Like, this is not that impressive. But it's a great opportunity. I love being with young people.
Thank you. And is it, I mean, on the other end of things, have you had any challenges with, older, I guess, clergy people, or, being able to, I guess, maybe before you have a chance to speak, or, share your experiences and your thoughts to really show what, I guess, what you're all about?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I really run into is people, starting off a conversation saying, "Are you old enough to be a priest?" I was like, all right, so that's not a great way to start. So there's a part of it where, they're not entirely taking me seriously, but hopefully I can offer them enough they can say, "Oh, you're wise beyond your years," some cliche like that. But it's often a kind of weird thing. I talk with my friends. I have a number of friends who are doctors, and they have the exact same experience where they'll walk into the room and you can tell the people, like, wait, you're not a real doctor. So I find that to be a struggle sometimes. I guess, I mean, I think I have what I know. I mean, in terms of like references that are speaking directly to people, I probably don't have those cultural references from older years, but I think at least enough of an understanding of what people are going to that I'm still a little relatable.
Thanks so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Casey, for that. Yeah, enjoy being the young priest while it lasts. I was the young teacher for a long time in the classroom, and I went. It hasn't changed a bit. You mentioned just made me laugh for a second. You mentioned that your friends who are doctors and all. I'm scared to ask this. Does the Doogie Howser reference get lost on anybody here or not? Do they? Or Casey, tell me you don't know who Doogie Howser is.
I get the reference, yes.
Oh, okay, good. All right, thank you. So that some connection there. Brother Greg, did I see that you had a question?
Indeed. I want to first thank Father Casey very much. As someone who teaches a class that has a leadership segment in it, your talk was very inspiring, provide a lot of nuggets for me to utilize. So thank you. One of the things as a Franciscan brother I really struggle with is golf, because I love to play golf, I love to watch golf, and even for people who are not religious, what's too much, what's not enough? I try to justify it. It's a Franciscan game, it's outdoors, it's beautiful, it's love of nature, but help me out, please.
Well, I gave up golf for the 4th time this past fall. I'm sure I'll take it up again at some point, but it is a very frustrating experience for me. I found that it was great to force me to take a day off where I just don't anymore. I really, working in a parish and a school, I just don't have days off. And so I get hours off, I get little segments off. And so golf was a good way of saying, like, nope, I'm busy, I'm getting away. And so I need something to replace that. So I think for that, it's a great spiritual thing. I found that I was getting angry too much. I think the poverty aspect is not as important. I don't think people quite realize that there's really cheap golf out there and there are ways to play economically and you don't have to be going to the country club. But I think that there are a lot of considerations, which, how much time are you spending with it, that you could be spending doing other things. Is it spiritually fruitful? For me, it wasn't. It is good exercise, which is great. So I would say in general, I think it can be a great practice for a religious, can be very contemplative. But I couldn't give you any specific numbers for how much money you should spend or how much time it should take. But I think it can be a great spiritual exercise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Greg. But Casey, you should avoid, I think I have good memory for things. You should avoid the problem you had last year. What did you lose while you were playing golf?
Yeah, I lost my keys.
To your?
To everything.
Oh, everything. It was the car, I think you told me, is that you lost your car keys too, right? Or
yeah, so the car key was on there. And so I went back in and I asked for a golf cart because I'd walked the 18 holes. So I was also very tired. It was like 15,000 steps. And so then I get back and it wasn't a great round either. So I'm not in a great mood and I can't find my keys. And I said, can I borrow a cart and I'll just drive around all the places. So that was just the terrible irony of it, was I got to go relive every terrible shot I had. And I remembered, oh, now I hit the woods, let's go there. And then I hit over there and so I had to relive everything, didn't find them. And so I call one of the friars, said, hey, can you bring the spare key? I'm about 20 minutes away. He comes by, turns out that it's, one of these new kind of keys, so it's like this thing. And so it has a battery in it, and the battery was dead. I'd never used the spare key. So he drives away and I couldn't get in. And so then, and it's just a long story.
Yeah.
And luckily, like 5 days later, they found the keys. So,
oh, that's
fun
good.
times.
Well, I would just like to share on behalf of those of us who don't play golf and are not as athletic, never have I lost my keys just sitting on my couch. So if you want to look for safe answers
I have.
there.
You've never lost your keys in the couch?
That's true. You're right. Lose them in the couch for sure. Iram, you had a comment, and then maybe we'll just be respectful of folks' time. We might continue to wrap up after that. But Iram, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. First of all, I need to tell Father Casey that I'm a huge follower of him. I follow his YouTube channel. And I would like to thank you for your beautiful words, because I think that I can listen to the recording of this meeting like a couple of hundreds of times and share with my friends and mates, And one of the reasons that I would like to share this is because I found that among the beautiful things you said that we need to take ourselves out for service, and we don't need to do everything, and that we need to focus on like what other things we can learn from our mistakes, from our weakness, because that's where God is too, and He is guiding us, even though we are in that moment of weakness. And I think that it is really connected, like directly connected to the youth, to my generation, because right now the young people, they are trying to do everything that they can, and they feel bad because they don't accomplish one thing, and they have like an error or something. And I know that you are so close to my generation, to young people, specifically. Like, I know we are all young here, young in spirit, but young in age. And I have found that young people want to be close to God. They want to be close to their spiritual life and be part of this. Do you think that there is a key to call the attention of young people? What is your advice to call their attention, to make them part of it, and to let them know that this is great, to be part of the church is great. It's not boring, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a magic potion or, a particular direction. I would have said maybe 10 years ago that service was that way. Growing up, that was my experience of my generation, was that we weren't necessarily involved in the church or spiritual or prayer things, but service was a way to get people involved. They were good people and they wanted to do good things. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily gone away, but my experience with the generation after me, working at 2 colleges and now a high school, is that it's sort of there, but that's been often a difficult to me, almost pulling teeth, where they don't want to do that. They want to do devotions and adoration and mass and things like that, which are great. So I'm not sure if there's a divide, or I just need to experience more. More to your question, if I could speculate, I think anything that helps young people take ownership of what they're doing, so that they're not just doing what an adult is telling them what to do, not that they're just doing what their parents want them to do, but if they can have their personal identity, that is what is it, Jungian stages, right? The stages of developments that teenagers are trying to differentiate themselves and have an identity. And I think that that's probably why we see some of the movements in the church growing among young people, which were relatively unpopular 10 years ago, being very popular now, almost precisely because they were unpopular, because now there's difference to it. You see people wanting more of a Latin mass. You want Eucharistic adoration. You want processions. You want a lot of these liturgical things that are very otherworldly. I wouldn't say that those are necessarily the answer, but I would say they're symptoms, and they point to what the answer is, which is that people want something that's distinct. They want an identity that helps them define who they are, as opposed to the world that they don't necessarily like. It gives them maybe a feeling of being special, but then also being united with other people like them in a very isolated world. And so we're seeing that in specific expressions. I don't want to say yes or no to the specific expressions, but I think they do point us beyond to a question we should be asking ourselves, which is, are we as a church becoming too normal or too mainstream, or are we just like the rest of the world? Because that's probably not going to appeal to young people. Whereas a generation before, that might have been exactly what people needed. They wanted to be able to fit in with the world, but I don't know if that's what people want now.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Iram and Casey, for not only that response, but even just all of our conversation this afternoon. I wonder, even just picking up on that last point, I know I've heard you in the video speak about it, and even you and I together, it's part of maybe even what wearing the habit calls people to, is that we can be both traditional and throw the football at the same time, and to be visible to the folks on campus, whether it's our students at school or even our colleagues. As you can tell, many of the folks on our call today are our colleagues as well. So really, Dr. Edgar, is it okay if I wrap it up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Father Casey and Father Mark Paul, for bringing Father Casey to us, and everybody else for being here. So yes,
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Really, thanks to all of you for joining us. I think we're only halfway through even our week of celebration of our patronal feast this week. But thank you to all of you for continuing to support us, for attending our programs. For Father Casey, really, I appreciate what Brother Bill said, for sharing your grasp on Franciscan leadership and spirituality, but also doing it in such a personal way. Really makes for such a time flies wonderful experience for that.